Hello and welcome. My name is Zaffar Iqbal, and you're watching the Mojo story. Now, in a warning of sorts, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said that U.S. will be reassessing its ties with Pakistan. Now, he made those remarks while testifying before the Congress on the withdrawal, rather the hasty withdrawal of the US from Afghanistan. He said that Pakistan has harbored Taliban in the past, including members of the Haqqani group. Pertinently, Sirajuddin Haqqani is the new interior minister of the Taliban government. Blinken told the Congress members that the US is obviously going to reassess its relation with Pakistan in the coming weeks. Uh, and and what exactly that means. Of course, we're joined by an eminent panel of experts. We're joined by uh, by by Sushant Sareen, who is a defense and strategic expert. We're also joined by Jonah Blank. We're joined by Ambassador TCA Raghavan and Radha Kumar. Now, if I may start with you, Sushant, what exactly you make of this statement, reassessing its ties with Pakistan? What does that mean coming at this point in time? If you can unmute, Sushant.
I'm unmuted from my side, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
can you
okay.
hear
We
me?
can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So Zafar, I'm a little bemused by this expression because it's a bit like bolting the stable door after the horse has left. You know,
Yeah.
so and frankly, if you are reassessing, and it's not just reassessing your relations with Pakistan, it is reassessing your relations with in the context of what you want Pakistan to do as far as Afghanistan is concerned.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people seem to have missed the latter part of what Secretary Blinken said,
Yeah.
and I think that is what I would focus on.
Yeah.
I and why just go after what he is saying? You look at
Mm,
some of the other statements which are coming out of Washington.
mm,
Stuff like security cooperation with people who until 3 weeks back or 4 weeks back were labeled as
mm.
international terrorists. Some
Yeah.
of those characters who are still on the UN designated list.
Yeah.
And if you're
And
going to
now
be
now they're
having,
the ministers. Yeah. Now
yeah, they're
they're holding
ministers.
ministerial posts. Yeah.
Exactly. And if you're going to be now talking about security and intelligence cooperation with people, who have a bounty on their head, and these
Yeah.
are people, including the Haqqani network, which is the intersection between the Taliban and the Al Qaeda, which means that
Mm,
if the Americans are now ready to deal with the Al Qaeda and they think there is a good Al Qaeda versus a bad ISKP, and ISKP is
yeah.
really a very tiny organization. It's not even a threat, but you're trying to
Mm,
make it out into some kind of a global threat in the making.
mm,
Then what terrorism are you fighting against? This whole concept of fighting against terrorism goes out of the window. So frankly, I don't know what they are getting to. Number one. Number two, for 20 years, the Americans have been saying that we are asking the Pakistanis to do more. The
yeah.
Pakistanis were smart. They gamed the Americans. So they would, salute the Americans and say, yes, sir, yes, sir. And they
Mhm.
would do more, but only for the Taliban. They never did more as far
Yes.
as the Americans were concerned, in the sense that
Yes.
all the security imperatives which the Americans had, which of
Yeah.
those were fulfilled by the Pakistanis? So, yes, to the extent when it suited the Pakistanis, they brought the Taliban onto the table. But
Yeah.
even then, we know, what kind of instructions the Taliban were given, the obduracy of the Taliban on
Yeah.
compromising on anything was, I would imagine, and I'm sure once you go forward 10 years, 20 years from now,
Mm,
there will be Pakistani accounts that we told the Taliban to stick to their guns, which is what they
mm,
did way back in 2001 when Mahmoud
yeah.
Ahmad went and met the then the then Amirul Mominin, and told him
yeah,
that you must defy the Americans. But they were telling the Americans, but we are telling the Taliban to shuck up Osama bin Laden. Uh,
yeah,
and even now we are hearing stories that while there was some tussle within the Taliban on having a government which
yeah,
would be a lot more inclusive, although
yeah,
I have a
yeah,
big issue with this inclusive term. The Pakistanis insisted that the Haqqanis must
yeah,
get a lion's share of the cabinet positions. Now, if
yes.
you still want to deal with the Pakistanis on Afghanistan, then God help America.
Sushant, it's interesting. You said that good Al Qaeda and bad Al Qaeda. We've been hearing in the past good Taliban and bad Taliban. But coming to the point of this fighting, of course, we saw those visuals in Kandahar where there were, people were being rounded up and beaten, and there were reports that Mullah Baradar and the Haqqanis had a you know, big friction between them, and that's the reason Mullah Baradar had left from that place. So those were also reports. So obviously, there is an infighting also happening in Taliban, even days after they have come together and formed the government.
Those tussles were bound to be there.
Yeah,
uh, those tussles were there right from day one, between the so-called guys of the political office and the military commanders on the ground. Uh,
mm,
Number one. Number two, between those in the Taliban who actually saw themselves as maybe Islamists, but as at the end of the day, Afghan nationalists in a manner of speaking.
yeah,
Although again,
yeah,
I have, these are terms which we use all the time, but I have a problem.
yeah,
But nevertheless, for want of a better word, and between the guys who were beholden to the Pakistanis, for example.
mm,
Then you have had tussles at the tribal level, at the ethnic level. So you have all those fissures within the Taliban movement. Those were
yeah,
papered over as long as there was a common enemy. The principal
yes,
contradiction, to use a
yeah,
Marxist term, was the presence of the United States. Now that that's gone
yes,
and the Taliban have managed to form their government,
yeah,
clearly there are all those fissures and all those problems are now coming out into the open. And some
absolutely.
of the story, look, you're talking about Bulla Baradar, we don't know whether he's still alive or dead, frankly.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
haven't seen the Amirul Mominin so far. Now,
yeah,
surely, rather than some flunky of his saying that, no, he's very much alive, maybe he should at least show his back, if not his front, to the people.
mm,
Nobody has seen him for I don't know how many months now. So clearly there is something happening out there which we don't know. But
yeah.
all credit to the Pakistanis for keeping a very tight lid over what exactly is happening out there.
Jonah Blank, of course, Secretary Blinken also said that Pakistan has multiplicity of interests, including some which are in clear conflict with the US. Now, what can one infer out of it? How can it be explained that Pakistan has multiplicity of interests? Some are in conflict with the US. Either there is conflict of interest or there is no conflict of interest. Some are in conflict, some are not.
Well, Zaffar, uh, I think that every country has its own interests, and
Yeah,
sometimes they intersect and sometimes they don't. India
yeah,
faces exactly the same issue vis-a-vis Pakistan and vis-a-vis China. After all,
right.
these are both nations that are neighbors of India's. India wants to be at peace with both of them. Both of
Yeah,
them often make that rather difficult, but
mm,
India is faced with the fact that
yeah,
it must figure out ways of dealing with
mm,
rather problematic neighbors. In the case
mm,
of the US, Pakistan is
mm.
not a neighbor of the US, but Pakistan will be very difficult for the US to utterly disengage from.
Right. Uh, Obviously, that we'll have to see what happens in the future. But interestingly, Taliban foreign minister also gave a press conference, and he said in his press conference, rather reiterated the stand of Taliban that it will not allow terrorists to use Afghanistan's territory to attack others. I would like to ask this question to Ambassador Raghavan. What do you make out of this statement? Taliban governments again and again emphasizing that they will not allow their territory to be used by terrorists. We know what happened in the past, and now this statement again coming at a time when world is quite is not very comfortable with what's happening there. The formation of government, it's not being inclusive, so to say, as Taliban had promised earlier.
Well, I think the statement quite simply means that the foreign minister is saying what he wants people to hear or what he expects people to hear. So he is only reflecting the sentiment which is being expressed to him back to those who are saying it. Whether that is going to happen or not, how it translates on the ground, and whether he is in fact in a position to give those guarantees, all those remain open questions. And certainly the fact that he is making a statement does not imply any substantive or objective change in terms of the realities of the forces which make up the Taliban.
No, what I was trying to say that Taliban had also said that it will form an inclusive government. That's not happened, as we can see now. This statement coming that its territory won't be used for terrorists to carry out activities against other countries. Again, that's a promise that many will not take.
Many will not take because of what happened in the past.
Yeah.
The premise on which that statement is based is that history doesn't have to necessarily repeat itself in exactly the same way as it played out earlier. Uh,
Hmm.
Whether that premise holds true, I don't think we are in a position to say. Certainly, most people in India have, with good reason, a certain healthy skepticism about that view and that sentiment which underwrites it. But certainly, we cannot predict what is going to happen in the future. It's entirely possible that the Taliban will turn into a totally new leaf and be an inward-looking regime which is not interested in its external factors at all. But is it likely to happen? Most people would say, given the composition of the Taliban, given the way it has come to power, it may be difficult for it to make that transformation in a dramatic manner, as is the way it is being promised now.
Well, Radha Kumar, I would want to ask you about the implications on India. We have discussed this, but I would like to again focus on this because just yesterday, Delhi police busted a module. They detained, they arrested two people who were trained by the ISI, and there's always this discussion going on that what's going to be the spillover of the Taliban in Jammu and Kashmir. Of course, you have been involved in Jammu and Kashmir. You were an interlocutor in the past. What's your sense, its impact on the rest of the country and particularly in Jammu and Kashmir?
Well, at a very broad level, there is no doubt that the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan has emboldened armed groups all over the world. And surely Jaish and Lashkar will already be fairly actively planning. Now, having said that, if we look at the data from the past, we know that when the Taliban came in 1996,
Yes.
again, Pakistan-based armed groups were emboldened, and their
Yeah.
websites at the time reflected this very clearly. In fact, it was, the war against America, Israel, and India
Mm.
together was the kind of big headline always for them. Um, but if we look at the actual data on violence itself, it was rising, but it was rising at the same rate as it had been rising in the early 1990s as well. So whether there was such a significant impact of the Taliban victory is not yet clear, looking at that data of the 1990s to the mid 2000s. What we do know, of course, is that when we had a substantive peace process from, say, 2003 to about 8, the violence sharply declined. And that decline continued almost until 2013. So, when we talk about impacts, bear in mind that there are also things that we can do ourselves to minimize the impact. And that's only one example, obviously, of what we can do. Uh, and so I would say, on the question of the nature and extent of the impact, we will perhaps have to wait and see a little bit. You've already talked about the internal fissures and tensions of the Taliban. We also do know, and we're seeing now, spreading disaffection and public demonstrations against the Taliban, the latest being in Kandahar. Uh, and so we don't know what is the stability of the existing regime, how it's going to work out, whether the pushes and pulls are going to see a shifting balance of power within. These are all, I think, issues that will take a few weeks for us to be able to see more clearly. Um, I would also say, coming back to that question of reassessment of relations between the US and Pakistan, the way I see it is that it is, in a way, going back to the Obama Clinton approach, which was twofold. One was that they downgraded relations, including aid. The other is that they strictly segregated different issues and different types of relationships and looked at the ones which they needed to downgrade more or the ones that they needed to upgrade a bit. And that's different from the Trump Bush policy. Bush,
Right.
bear in mind that, of course, the American military has been
Yeah.
very intimately engaged with the Pakistan military for 3, 4, 5 decades,
Right.
certainly far more than the Indian American military to
Yeah.
military relationship. And so
Yeah.
there was a level, obviously, of knowledge and comfort and so on. And I do think that both Clinton and Obama tried to shift that level of comfort or to narrow it a little and to shift it towards greater engagement with the more democratic countries such as India, of course. So that's how I would read that one. And the question really to me is, well, how is India going to play that? And
Yeah.
what are we going to look at in those
Yeah.
terms? I would be interested in hearing what other panelists would have to say on this recent news about Indian air bases, about the
Yes. Yes.
possibility of.
If I can read out exactly, he said that US is deeply engaged with New Delhi regarding the situation, especially regarding over the horizon assistance if needed. So those were the exact words of Secretary Blinken. I would want to ask Sushant. Sushant, what do you make of this? The speculation about bases.
Uh, Zafar, I'll just come to this in half a minute. But
Yeah.
three things I just wanted to say earlier.
Yeah.
On this promise which the Taliban are holding out, I think Ambassador Raghavan knows this better than us. If I mistake not, he was probably in Islamabad in 2004 also,
Yeah.
when, that famous agreement between Musharraf and Vajpayee was signed. Wasn't
Hmm.
this exactly the line which the Pakistanis used? That we will not allow our territory to be used. And Zafar, uh, you stay in Kashmir. Please tell us how that played out subsequently. Okay, that is one. And given the close links between the Taliban and the Pakistanis, well, I think You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure that out.
Yeah.
Secondly, on this thing that they could be inward looking, as Ambassador Raghavan was saying, I think I don't discount that possibility, but I would caution anybody that just because for the moment or for the next 1, 2, 3 years, the Taliban focus is internal, should not, make people let down their guard, simply because that right now they need internal consolidation. But the nature of the movement, the nature of the beast, so as to speak, is such that this cannot but expand out of Afghanistan. It cannot remain limited to Afghanistan. That's not what this movement is all about. That's not what the mindset, that's not what the ideology is all about. Okay, that's the second. And the third is on the impact in Kashmir. I think you need to look at more years. You look at first 89, 90, when the Soviet withdrawal takes place,
Yes.
and you
Yes.
suddenly connect it to what happened in Kashmir around that
Absolutely.
time. Okay,
Yeah.
that is one cutoff year for me. The second cutoff year for me is 92, when the Mujahideen take over, and then you study the trajectory of what happened in Kashmir. Then you
Yeah.
come to 96, okay, when the Taliban take over. And finally, while Radha might be right on the stats, that there was no major spike or something, look at the lethality of the attacks and the engagements between the security forces and the terrorists in Kashmir at at each subsequent stage, and you will see that it only increased much more than what it used to be earlier. And finally, in the 2003 to 2008 period, you can't divorce it from what was happening in the rest of the world. 9/11 had taken place. There was enormous pressure on Pakistan. They were also looking for some kind of a way out. But I don't want to make this entirely about Kashmir. So we can discuss this in some other show. On the main question which you asked, look, I think this, in a manner of speaking, will be one of the test cases of how India and US strategic partnership is likely to move forward. Okay, we've signed the foundational agreements and all of that. All of that is all very well, but if this over the horizon operations, because they simply cannot work from the Gulf, right? It's just not possible. It's not even practical. The flying time is too much. The hovering time is too little. It just doesn't work. But if they come into India and they get some kind of basing rights either in Kashmir or in, say, Gujarat or any of the other places, then we'll have to see how this whole thing plays out with the Pakistanis, because they will then it'll badly spook them. I would say that we should go for it, but I think I don't know how this is ultimately going to play out. That is one. The other is going to be the political repercussions of and the reverberations of this within India. It'll be a dumbed down debate, but you have sold India to America, new East India Company, all those old familiar tropes are likely to come back. So I think the government will have to handle the politics of this as much as it will have to handle the strategic and the military dimension of it. But if something like this can be worked out, I think it does give a huge fillip to India-America relations, number one. Number two, I think it will address some of the very serious concerns that at least people like me have when we hear the Americans talk about security and intelligence cooperation with the Taliban, because that kind of worries me no end.
Well, important, Sushant saying that we should go for it on the question of bases. Jonah, what do you say? It will be a major shift.
Yes, it would. Let me first make a point that is, I think, useful for the discussion.
Yeah.
I've been with then Senator, now President Biden, and with now Secretary of State Tony Blinken, then my staff director, to Pakistan and, of course, to India, to Afghanistan many times. And I think it's important for everyone to understand that there really is not a lot that the U.S. has to learn about Pakistan's double dealing. This has been pretty well known in policymaking circles. The question is, what do you do about it? And that is a question that I think does not really have an easy answer. The way I've sometimes discussed it with various principles is, on any given day, the US may get between 20% and 40% of what it wants out of Pakistan. We could drop that to zero, and maybe we'll have to, but let's be aware that 20% is better than 0%. And I'm frankly not offering any kind of good or optimistic solution. I think that the way forward is for the US to keep on strengthening its security ties to India, which brings us to the question you've asked, Radha's question about basing. I'm very doubtful that India will give permission for this, because India never has. The US has been trying to get basing access for at least 20 years. So I doubt it will actually occur. I agree with Sushant. I think that India should, because I think the relationship should grow. But even if India does, I think as an operational matter, it won't really result in a whole lot of strikes, simply because any such strike would have to overfly Pakistani airspace, and Pakistan is highly unlikely to agree to any aircraft coming from Indian territory into its airspace. It's far more likely either to agree or to get taken by surprise or refrain from shooting down either a manned aircraft or a UAV, a drone, coming either from one of the other neighbors or from an aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea.
Well, Ambassador Raghavan, Jonah saying obviously it may not be possible for India to give bases, but there is a discussion that's already there. What's the sense that you make? Because this is an important issue. We come to this point where we're discussing this now.
I think we should be clear about the fundamentals first. And this question of the US approach to Afghanistan and Pakistan and India's approach to Afghanistan, let's be very clear on one point, that neither for the United States nor for India is Afghanistan the most important or the only important issue in its strategic and foreign policy portfolio. There are a multiplicity of issues that the US deals with, and therefore when it's dealing with Pakistan, it just doesn't have Afghanistan in mind. And similarly, when we deal with the US, we don't just have in mind. You have a number of other priorities in which Afghanistan may figure, but it's certainly not the top or the only one, notwithstanding the fact that Afghanistan dominates the news cycle today. If Afghanistan was the only issue US was concerned about, it would not have made so many mistakes when it dealt with Pakistan on Afghanistan, because it had to balance various forces, various factors, various interests. Therefore, it ended up in no-win situations like it has now. So similarly, the India-US interface is not going to have Afghanistan as its foundation. It is going to have a range of other issues, and certainly when India looks at the world, it looks at more than the US, which is still 2.5 oceans away, or more than Afghanistan. So, when we talk about bases and the need for having bases, the fact is your closest and most important neighbor just now is China. It is a great power which is very much part of your region, and therefore you will have to be extra careful, quite regardless of the long history you have had and what has become now, therefore, a kind of default mode of thinking in Indian foreign policy, that you will not allow foreign bases in India. Quite apart from that background, the fact is that your relationship with China today needs to be handled with much greater sensitivity and care for various reasons which are well known. So I don't see frankly, any real possibility of something like this happening, and I don't think it's going to be a foundational issue as far as Afghanistan is concerned, where India-US cooperation comes in. I think there are numerous other ways of cooperating with regard to Afghanistan, and I think we'll see a lot of that. But I don't see bases located in Jammu and Kashmir as a real possibility. With regard to you raised the important,
question of China. Of course, we'll be discussing it. But before that, there is also a lot of messaging involved here. A lot of messaging going on. Sushant, maybe you can take this. ISI chief going to Kabul. CIA chief coming to CIA, of course, director coming to India and then going to Pakistan. Now, ISI chief going to Kabul and then pictures being splashed all over. There's a lot of messaging also happening. Pakistan is also perhaps trying to put across the message that it is, in fact, Pakistan which holds all the cards. So, in a way, US, if it has to do business, it has to do business with Pakistan. It just cannot avoid Pakistan at all.
No, that's true. I think I think the messaging of at least the ISI chiefs' pictures being splashed all over was not just that we are the top dogs. You want to do anything in Afghanistan, you have to come through us. That, of course, was one of the messages. But I think beyond that, it was, I think, messaging within Afghanistan as well. This guy strutting around like he's the new viceroy or the pro council of Afghanistan. So that was very, very clear. Look, the question, however, Zaffar, is what is the business we are talking about? What business does anybody want to do now in Afghanistan? If the idea is that, okay, fine, we are reconciled to the Taliban, we are reconciled to Al Qaeda's presence in Afghanistan, we are reconciled to these horrible fellows called the Haqqanis, then what is left to do in Afghanistan? Then let these guys fight.
I like to interject here, Sushant. We are missing out at China. China has already committed $30 million for,
Yeah,
of course, for the reconstruction of
Zafar,
Afghanistan. Yeah,
Zafar, that $30 million is neither here nor there. I don't know what they're going to give in that. For example, if they're going to be giving those third-rate vaccines which they're producing,
yeah.
they can keep
They,
dumping those vaccines out there. Some
in fact,
medicines they will dump.
vaccine is a part of that.
Yeah, yeah,
I
of
read it
course. So
somewhere.
that
Yeah, yeah.
that's what I'm saying. That we don't know what exactly is the composition of that $31 million, and it's worth nothing really right now.
Hmm.
Afghanistan's financial requirements transcend the 30 million or $1 billion or whatever else. Will be staring at a humanitarian crisis, and
Yes.
I think countries with the interests of Afghans will have to balance out the humanitarian aspect of it at the same time ensuring that you're not going to do something which strengthens the Taliban. So I think you will have to do something like that. You will have to balance it out. How you do it, I think an ambassador or a diplomat is better placed than me to explain how that is going to be done. But so one, you have to balance that out. Second, this whole thing that China will move in. Good, yeah, let China move in. Let them also start spending some money in Afghanistan. They've been free riding in Afghanistan for donkey's years. Let them start putting their money where their mouth is. What have they done? They've already put in what $200 million or some piddly little amount over the last 30 years, 20 years. And they pretend as though they are the real masters of this place. So let them go and fund Afghanistan. Why not? What is the big deal out there? Let's see what happens out there. Let's see the Taliban deal with the Chinese out there. This whole CPEC will take off. What is there in CPEC? What is the financial value of CPEC? Even the Chinese are losing interest in it. There will be a road which goes to Central Asia. It's that one old El Dorado that nobody has ever seen the gold out there. Just people keep talking about it all the time. What
Yeah.
will come from Central Asia? What will go to Central Asia? What is the trade of Central Asia? Somebody should study those trade patterns, yeah, before people shooting their mouth off. How many trucks will go? CPEC will replace Malacca dilemma. Has anybody done the math of what oil goes in a container ship or a tanker, and how many trucks will be required to take the same amount of oil over more than 3,000 kilometers, first up north, then over 700 kilometers of Karakoram Pass, which is torturous. Half the time there are landslides taking place. Has anybody done all this math here? So this whole thing, let China take over. I say, good. It's our gift to China.
Jonah, it's a gift to China. Let them take over. Let them spend the money. Of course, we're talking very academically, but Sushant saying that let them take some practical steps. Given
Mhm.
China's also proximity with Pakistan, what's the sense that you make of the?
I agree with Sushant. I do not think that China is going to be stepping in a big way. If they were, I would agree. Let them have this. This has not exactly been a wonderful opportunity for the U.S. for the past 20 years. Let's
Okay.
remember that Joe Biden has wanted to get out of Afghanistan for 12 years. I was with him when he made that decision in January of 2009. So some people feel we should have gotten out even earlier than that. And certainly in retrospect, there's a very good argument for it. China had the opportunity to construct pipelines, to exploit rare earths, to mine copper, to do any project it wished for 20 years under a security umbrella provided free by the United States and the world community. It didn't. So I think the likelihood that it's actually going to step up with real money now is rather far fetched. If they want to do it, I agree with Sushant. Great.
Radha, your views on this, on the issue of China?
Oh, well, I would certainly agree that they're not planning to spend any great amount of money. And in
Yeah.
fact, this $30 million thing that you have referred to, I would
Yeah.
see quite differently. This is that while the UN and other countries are trying to form a consensus on how aid should be delivered, China is saying, well, we'll deal directly with the Taliban and do it that way. And in that sense, I see them bucking an international consensus with what has been rightly called peanuts in terms of aid. Um, the second thing I would say, though, and here I'll remind all of us about the long held Indian devotion to Kautilya's circles. Um, yes, maybe nobody will gain anything from Afghanistan. Maybe it's good to allow China and Pakistan to get bogged down in a quagmire. China less so, Pakistan more so, since they are much more intimately involved. However, the fact is we have two hostile neighbors, Pakistan and China. And the old Cautillian idea that if you can at least exercise some pressure or restraint through the neighbors on the other side of these countries, that can perhaps help you to some extent. So, this is, of course, yet unexplored territory. I would say that, in fact, there is a common American Indian interest in actually preventing China from occupying what is in the end a strategic space, perhaps more than an economic one.
Ambassador Raghavan, you'd want to add?
I would tend to agree with all the views which have been expressed. I think what Dr. Radha Kumar said is very true, that Afghanistan has value as a strategic space, which has always been a predominant factor in Indian policy making on Afghanistan. But I would also agree with what Mr. Sareen and Mr. Blank said about China. I don't see China being in a great hurry to get into Afghanistan. But let us be also clear. If you see what is happening across Central Asia, if, and this is a very big if stability and security and some reasonable economic policy regime comes into Afghanistan, you can be pretty sure that the Chinese will be very big players over there in the economic sense, because that is really what has happened across the whole of Central Asia. And this is not so much to do with policy or Chinese strategic thinking. It is just the preponderant weight of China as an economic power in the whole region. So I think all these factors which were mentioned are very true. But I don't think we should see everything which is happening in Afghanistan is going to happen in a compressed time scale. What has
Well,
changed? What has changed is a very, very significant change with the US withdrawal and the loss of US prestige in the region. The effects of this are going to be played out over a reasonably long period of time, and it's not going to happen in the next few months.
yes, of course, it's early days. We'll have to see how it plays out in the future. That brings us to the end of today's discussion. Thanks a lot to all our panelists for joining us. That's all we have for today's show. Thanks for watching.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.